The room was silent in the way only ancient places can be silent, not empty, not lifeless, but heavy with memory. Dr. Elias Rowan sat alone beneath a dim amber lamp, surrounded by shelves that held the remains of worlds long gone, drawers of stone, bones older than language, deaths so ancient that even time itself had forgotten their names. He moved slowly, as if afraid that sudden motion might disturb the past. People believed fossils were quiet things, harmless, educational, but Elias knew better. Every fossil was a moment of terror that never ended, a final second stretched across millions of years, waiting patiently for someone to notice. He opened a drawer. Inside lay the fossilized remains of a marine creature that had lived when the oceans ruled the earth. Its spine was twisted, its jaws frozen open, tooth marks scarred its ribs, deep and unmistakable. This creature had not died peacefully. It had been attacked, bitten, shaken violently in the dark water, its body fighting instinctively, long after escape was impossible. Elias rested his fingertips near the stone, never touching. He never touched them if he could help it. Everyone thinks fossils are about life, he whispered to the empty room. But they're really about endings. This creature had known fear. That was something science rarely said out loud. Fear did not fossilize, but its evidence did. The angle of the bones, the damage, the frozen tension locked inside stone. Somewhere above the ancient sea, the sun had still risen and set. The waves had still shimmered. Life had gone on, unaware that below the surface, one small life was ending violently and forever. Elias closed the drawer gently. There were thousands like it. As a child he had imagined fossils as trophies of survival, proof that something had lasted, that it had won against time. But the older he grew, the more he understood the truth. Fossils were not the survivors. They were the unlucky ones. Out of billions of lives that had lived and died, only a tiny fraction were chosen to be remembered, and most were remembered because they died in the worst ways imaginable. He walked deeper into the archive, footsteps soft against the floor, shadows clung to the walls. Each cabinet held a different tragedy, creatures burned alive by volcanic ash, animals crushed in collapsing earth, mothers frozen mid-protection, bodies curved around offspring they could not save. One fossil, in particular, always stayed with him. It was small, almost delicate, a prehistoric reptile no longer than a human arm. Its body was curled tightly, spine bent inward, tail wrapped close, as if trying to protect itself from something coming too fast to escape. The position was not natural, it was defensive. This creature had felt pain. Elias had spent years studying it, measuring angles, comparing data. The conclusion was unavoidable. A sudden environmental collapse, possibly a sinkhole or underwater landslide, had swallowed it whole. There had been no time to run, no time to understand, just instinct, fear, and darkness. In that final moment, this creature had not known it would be discovered. It had not known it would matter. It had simply tried to survive. Elias often wondered if that was what made these fossils so unbearable. They were not monuments to greatness. They were records of effort, of trying. He sat down beside the work table and exhaled slowly, as if matching his breath to the slow rhythm of geological time. Outside, the modern world buzzed with sound and movement, unaware of the quiet suffering locked away beneath the museum's roof. Millions of years ago, the earth had been louder. Volcanoes tore open the land, seas boiled, forests burned and regrew and burned again. Life adapted, evolved, and endured until suddenly, it didn't. And sometimes, death came so quickly that the moment itself was preserved. One fossil showed a fish mid-swim, mouth open, gills flared, body perfectly aligned as if still moving through water. No predator marks, no injury, just sudden death, likely poisoned by toxic algae or oxygen-depleted waters. One moment alive, the next suspended in stillness. Elias imagined it, the gentle resistance of water against scales, the rhythm of movement, and then nothing. No pain, perhaps, but no understanding, either. Humans like to believe that suffering required awareness, but fear existed long before thought. It lived in nerves and reflexes, in muscle memory and instinct. These creatures may not have questioned their deaths, but their bodies remembered them. That was what fossils were, memories without minds. As the hours passed, Elias allowed himself to drift, his voice barely louder than breath as he recorded notes meant not for journals, but for listeners, for those who lay awake at night, searching for meaning in the dark. These deaths were not dramatic, he murmured. They were not heroic, they were ordinary. And that is what makes them haunting. Somewhere deep in time, a massive reptile had inhaled ash so hot it scorched its lungs from the inside. Another had been trapped in resin, its struggle sealing its fate as surely as cement. An entire herd had drowned together, Bodies pressed against one another as the floodwaters rose. None of them had known they were part of history. Ilias closed his eyes. He thought of how easily modern life distracted itself from death, how people scrolled past it, avoided it, sanitized it. But the earth had never done that. The earth remembered everything. It did not judge, it did not forgive. It simply recorded. Pressure, time, silence. That was all it took. When he finally stood, the night felt heavier, as if the fossils were watching him leave, not accusing, not pleading, just existing, waiting for someone to listen. As he turned off the lamp, the room fell into darkness once more. The bones returned to shadow. But their stories did not fade. They lingered in the air, ancient and patient, reminding anyone willing to hear that long before humans told stories to survive the night, the earth itself had been telling stories of death, and it was only just beginning. Dr. Elias Rowan often said that most deaths in prehistory were not slow. They did not arrive with warning or understanding. They arrived like a closing door, swift and final, leaving no space for goodbye. The fossils that troubled him most were not the ones marked by violence, but the ones frozen in the middle of living, caught between one breath and the next. He stood before a slab of stone taller than himself, its surface etched with the faint outline of fish scattered in impossible positions. They were layered together, bodies overlapping, fins splayed, mouths open, some faced upward, others downward. None showed signs of injury. They had been swimming. A warm, shallow sea had once covered this land. Sunlight filtered down in trembling lines. Life moved gently through the water. Then something changed. Oxygen vanished. Toxic blooms spread silently. The water that had carried them became a suffocating trap. Death did not chase these fish. It surrounded them. They had not panicked at first. Their bodies would have struggled automatically, gills flaring wider, muscles twitching in confusion. And then, without ceremony, the water itself betrayed them. In minutes, perhaps seconds, an entire world went still. Elias traced the air near the fossil with his finger, imagining the moment when motion stopped, but gravity had not yet taken over. They were preserved exactly where they died, as if the sea itself had been turned to stone. There was something unbearable about that stillness. Other fossils told similar stories. Creatures entombed not by predators, but by the Earth's sudden decisions. A shift in pressure, a crack in the crust, a release of fire. Volcanoes were particularly honest in their cruelty. Ash fell like snow, thick and hot, blotting out the sky. Forests disappeared beneath choking clouds. Animals fled until their lungs burned and their legs failed. Some never moved at all, trapped where they stood as the air turned lethal. One fossilized reptile lay stretched forward, limbs extended, body angled as if running. The ash around it was dense, heavy, unforgiving. It had not died from flame, but from breath. The heat had seared its lungs long before its body fell. Elias imagined the sky growing dark at midday. The sudden silence of birds, the confusion, the desperate instinct to escape something that had no edge, no direction, no mercy. No creature outran the air. There were places where the earth did not kill with fire, but with weight. Mudslides and collapsing riverbanks swallowed herds whole. Water-saturated earth gave way without warning, dragging trees, rocks, and animals into a thick, suffocating flow. The struggle was brief, the pressure immediate. Fossils from such events were often tangled together, limbs overlapping, necks twisted at unnatural angles. Evidence of panic compressed into a single layer of stone. Ilias always found himself pausing longer at those sites, not because the deaths were worse, but because they were shared. In those final moments, no creature died alone. Some fossils told stories so sudden that even fear had no time to form. A small, bird-like dinosaur preserved with feathers flared outward, as if startled. Its heart may have stopped before its mind could react. A falling boulder, a collapsing tree, an impact that ended thought instantly. These were merciful deaths. Some said. Elias never liked that word. Mercy implied intention. The earth had none. There were also fossils caught in floods, their bodies aligned in the same direction, all carried by the same unstoppable current. Water rose. Panic followed. Exhaustion ended it. And then, quiet. The current laid them down gently, almost respectfully, as if ashamed of what it had done. In one site, a line of footprints stopped abruptly at what had once been the edge of a river. Beyond that point, nothing. The creature had stepped forward and vanished, swallowed by soft sediment that behaved like liquid. A hidden death. A silent one. Elias imagined the confusion of that moment. Solid ground becoming a lie. Muscles failing against invisible resistance. The surface closing over, erasing all evidence of struggle. Some deaths left no sound at all. As the night deepened, Elias recorded his thoughts in a voice meant to soothe. not alarm. He wanted listeners to feel the weight of these moments without being disturbed by them, to understand that sudden death was not always violent, but it was always final. These creatures did not suffer long, he said softly, but they also did not understand why they were dying. And that may be the cruelest part. Understanding, after all, was a luxury of later minds. The earth moved on immediately, ash cooled, water settled, new life crept into the empty spaces left behind. The dead were not mourned, they were covered, pressed, and forgotten except for the rare few whose endings were sealed so perfectly that time itself could not erase them. Those were the ones that became fossils. As Elias turned away from the stone slabs, he felt the familiar ache settle in his chest. Not fear, not sadness, exactly. Something quieter. Respect. These deaths were not stories of failure. They were reminders that life existed at the mercy of forces far larger than intention or effort. That survival was never guaranteed, no matter how strong or well-adapted a creature might be. The lights dimmed automatically as the hour grew late. Shadows reclaimed the walls. And somewhere deep beneath layers of rock and time, the earth kept its secrets waiting for the next moment when it would choose without warning to end everything again. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Not every death in the fossil record arrived without resistance. Some came with struggle, with effort, with a final refusal to disappear quietly. These were the fossils that Dr. Elias Rowan found the hardest to speak about, because they revealed something painfully familiar: the desire to live. He stood before two skeletons locked together in stone, their bones fused by time, their positions unchanged since the moment they fell. One was a predator, larger, armed with curved teeth and powerful limbs. The other was smaller, but its jaws were clamped around the predator's throat, teeth embedded deep, never released. They had killed each other. The battle had not been planned. It had erupted in an instant, driven by hunger or fear or territory. Muscle had met muscle, teeth had found flesh, and somewhere between attack and defense, something had gone wrong. Perhaps the smaller creature struck a vital artery. Perhaps the predator's weight pinned them both in unstable ground. However it happened, neither walked away. Elias often wondered which of them realized first that survival was no longer possible. The stone preserved every detail, the tension in the limbs, the unnatural angle of the spine, the way their bodies leaned into one another, not as enemies, but as prisoners of the same ending. There was something unbearably human about it. Elsewhere, another fossil told a quieter but no less devastating story. A mother, preserved in a protective curl, her body arched over several smaller forms pressed close to her chest. Her spine formed a shield, her limbs created a barrier. The young beneath her were fragile, unfinished, still learning what it meant to exist. She had not tried to save herself. The ash that buried them had been fast. The heat had been unforgiving, but in the final moments, instinct had overridden fear. She had positioned herself between danger and her young, her body absorbing what little protection it could offer. It had not been enough. Elias lingered there longer than he intended, his breath slow, his voice barely audible as he recorded. He did not add commentary, he did not need to. The stone spoke clearly enough. Some fossils captured struggle without heroism, desperation without triumph. A creature trapped in sticky resin, limbs extended, wings partially spread, caught between flight and stillness. The resin had flowed slowly, clinging, tightening, turning effort into exhaustion. Every movement had only sealed the trap further. The fossils showed the cost of fighting too hard. There were others that told stories of tragic irony. A predator preserved with the remains of its final meal lodged in its throat. The prey had fought back, spines catching, bones wedging, turning the hunter's advantage into its undoing. The predator had suffocated, not from weakness, but from success. Elias often thought about that one. Victory and death, separated by a single moment. Some creatures were caught while fleeing. Their bodies angled forward, limbs extended, tails straightened for balance. They had been running toward something they never reached. Safety, water, shelter, the future. The ground beneath them had given way, or the air had turned poisonous, or the fire had simply moved faster than they could. Their muscles were frozen mid-stride, every fiber strained toward escape that never came. And then there were the ones who almost made it. A fossil of a marine animal lay half-buried, its body angled upward, as if rising toward the surface. The sediment told the story clearly. The creature had been trapped below, struggling against thickening mud, slowly sinking. At the last moment, it had surged upward, perhaps sensing lighter water above. Its head was free, its body was not. The fossil captured that exact instant, the line between survival and suffocation drawn sharply through stone. Elias had stared at it for years, unable to decide which part was worse, the hope or the loss. "These are not monsters," he whispered once, long after the lights had dimmed. "They are witnesses, witnesses to the truth that life does not end because it gives up. It ends because it is overwhelmed." The earth did not record their fear, but it recorded their resistance. Bent bones, worn teeth, strained joints. Every mark a reminder that death was not accepted quietly. Elias felt a familiar weight in his chest, one he carried home with him every night. The knowledge that struggle did not guarantee survival, but it gave meaning to the attempt. These fossils were not peaceful. They were honest. They showed that long before humans told stories of courage and sacrifice, life itself had already been practicing them, without words, without witnesses, without reward. As he turned away from the stone, Elias paused, his reflection faint in the glass. For a moment, the past and present overlapped. A living man standing before the proof that effort had always existed, even when success had not. And in that quiet overlap, the fossils seemed less like relics and more like mirrors, reflecting something ancient and unchanging. The will to live, even when the earth decided otherwise. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. By the time the night reached its deepest hour, the archive felt less like a place of study and more like a place of remembrance. Dr. Elias Rowan moved slowly now, not out of fatigue, but out of reverence. He had spent a lifetime surrounded by death, yet it had never grown ordinary to him. If anything, it had grown heavier, more meaningful, as if each fossil added its quiet weight to his own brief existence. People often asked why the earth chose to remember some lives and not others. Why these creatures, out of countless billions, were preserved while the rest vanished without trace. Elias had learned that there was no single answer. Memory in geology was not granted by importance or strength. It was granted by accident, a body buried quickly enough, pressure applied just right, time allowed to do its patient work, pain transformed into permanence. He stopped beside a long table where several fossils rested beneath protective glass. Their outlines were faint, almost ghost-like. To an untrained eye, they looked incomplete, unfinished. But Elias knew better. What was missing had never been saved. What remained was enough. These creatures had lived without knowing they would become lessons. They had died without knowing they would be remembered. And yet, here they were, speaking across millions of years to minds that did not yet exist when they took their final breath. There was a strange kindness in that. Not kindness from the earth, which remained indifferent, but kindness from time itself. Time, which usually erased everything, had paused just once, just enough to say, this mattered. Elias lowered himself into a chair and closed his eyes. He imagined the slow passage of ages, sediment settling, oceans retreating, mountains rising where seas once lay, civilizations not yet imagined coming and going like brief thoughts, all of it layered atop these quiet deaths, pressing them into stone, protecting them even as it buried them deeper. In that unimaginable span, the fear of those final moments had faded, the panic, the struggle, the confusion. What remained was shape, form, and story. The sharp edges of suffering softened by time into something gentler, something almost peaceful. Perhaps that was the final gift of fossilization. Suffering did not last forever. Memory did. Elias often thought about the way humans feared being forgotten, how desperately they tried to leave marks, names, buildings, words, hoping something would remain. The creatures in these stones had never wanted that. They had not chased legacy. They had simply lived until they could not. And still the earth had remembered them. He opened his eyes and looked around the darkened room. The cabinets stood quietly, patient as always. They did not demand attention. They did not insist on meaning. They waited. Waiting, he had learned, was the language of the ancient world. In his recordings, Elias spoke softly now, his voice steady, unhurried, meant to guide listeners toward rest rather than answers. These fossils are not warnings, he said. They are reminders that life has always been fragile, and that fragility does not make it weak. Each preserved death was proof that life had existed at all, that muscles had moved, that hearts had beaten, that something had once resisted the dark. Even the most bizarre deaths, the ones frozen in panic or conflict or sudden catastrophe, had been part of a long, unbroken story. A story that led, eventually, to the quiet room where he now sat, to the people listening in the dark, breathing slowly, letting the weight of ancient time ease their own. Elias stood and began turning off the lights, one by one. The fossils slipped back into shadow, their shapes fading, but their presence unchanged. They did not need light to exist. They had endured far worse. At the door, he paused, hand resting against the cool metal frame. For a moment he imagined the countless lives still hidden beneath the Earth's surface, waiting, not to be found perhaps, but to be acknowledged. Acknowledgement, he believed, was enough. As he stepped out into the night, the modern world greeted him softly. Distant traffic, a breeze moving through trees, the small, ordinary sounds of life continuing. He breathed them in, aware of how temporary they were, and how precious. Behind him, the Earth kept its memory. Ahead of him, life moved forward, and somewhere between those two truths, meaning quietly existed, not in how long something lasted, but in the simple, stubborn fact that it had lived at all. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel.